Great, thank you so much, Sue, and I appreciate being invited to participate in this NewMR webinar. Hello, everyone. As Sue mentioned, I'm Dory Painter from Leapfrog Marketing Research. I'm usually based in San Francisco, but for the past year, my family and I have been having an amazing experience living and working in Tokyo. So today, let's see, just a little bit of background. I've been a qualitative researcher for over 20 years, and I still love it, and I get excited to tackle every new project. I use a wide variety of methodologies depending on my clients' objectives, and I do things, I would call traditional, like in-person focus groups and usability studies and ethnographies, but also a lot of newer digital-based methodologies. So when Ray asked me to talk about something that was new but not technology, I had to give it some thought, as it seems like so many developments in research these days are driven by technology. But I realized that one significant shift in my mindset over the past few years is to think longer term when I'm designing studies. So today I'm going to talk about the limitations of traditional qualitative and why you should think about going long. And then I'm going to provide you some examples that I hope will really just inspire you to think of some new qualitative research goals, and hope that it might, that might benefit from more longitudinal approach. So, as Sue mentioned in the earlier one, qualitative research we all know and love, and obviously there are a lot of benefits to qualitative research, but given the time constraints, I'm going to just focus on a couple limitations of traditional qualitative. Usually we think of, a 1 hour one-on-one or a 2-hour focus group or maybe a 3-hour ethnography, and they tend to be one point in time. So you meet with them and then, then you're gone. It's also, because of this structure, it's easy to miss kind of critical moments in whatever it is that you're focused on studying. Another downside is that these more traditional methodologies really rely on the memory of your participants to explain what they were doing or how they were feeling at the time. It could be something they did earlier in the day, but it could be something they did a couple weeks or months or even a year ago. Another limitation of traditional qualitative would be location constraints. So it's realistically, you can't really go on vacation with them. Maybe you could watch somebody care for their newborn for an hour or something, but you're not going to be there experiencing it with them for the first days or weeks. You can't really attend a doctor's appointment. So there are obviously some location constraints to traditional qualitative. And then there are also activity constraints. You can't research and buy a car with someone through the whole customer journey process. You can't be there with them planning a wedding. You can't even be there really for them to go through a whole new roll of paper towels, right? So there's some limitations to activities. My suggested solution is to go long. So for not every study, of course, but in studies where it seems like having some sort of longitudinal contact with the participants would be beneficial, let's recruit participants for 2 days or 2 weeks or 2 months or a year. I know some of you are already doing this, but I would encourage others to start thinking in this way when you're designing a study. So often, sorry, Ray, it will involve some kind of web or mobile-based asynchronous platform, but you certainly could do these studies using a telephone or email or just more frequent in-person interviews. All of those would help you extend the contact you have with the participants. It's one of the things to think about is that it, of course, is going to allow moderators, observers, and participants to engage with the research multiple times over the course of the study. Obvious benefits to that. You can easily collect text, photos, videos, and audio. And these longitudinal studies can take the form of either a standalone project or, in some cases, if you want to be able to communicate with your participants over an even longer period of time, or maybe you have a larger group that you want to be able to ask certain subsegments questions, you could even create an insights community. Take note, this not surprisingly, does entail more work. It's more work to maintain engagement with the participants over a longer period of time. You have to prepare for attrition, and you certainly get a huge volume of data from these studies. So you have to be prepared for how to analyze that and present the results. Some of the advantages of longitudinal qual, one is just this dialogue idea. You get to talk to the same person multiple times at different stages of whatever process or experience you're studying. You also get to be in the moment with participants where the action's happening regardless of the location or time of day. And as we talked about earlier, one of the downsides is there is reliance on memory. So when you're with them over a longer period of time, assuming, depending on the platforms that you're using, but you can place a lot less reliance on memory. So you can ask them to show you things and not just tell you things. And another benefit is that it allows the process to happen at a more natural pace with natural influences. So obviously, if somebody is purchasing something and it takes a month for them to decide what to get, instead of asking them to try to accomplish that in a 3-hour ethnography, you can actually have them go through the whole process over the month and figure out who they talk to, what kinds of things they read, and get more details. Another benefit that I've seen is that it over time, assuming that the moderator has been empathetic and involved and engaged with the participants, you end up building trust and the barriers go down. So participants are more likely to show you things that they might not have showed you in a short interview, or tell you things that they wouldn't have gotten to or wouldn't have trusted to tell you. So that's another benefit of going long. And certainly, just from a practical standpoint, it gives you more time to go into more depth in more topics. So the result from these longitudinal studies is that you get deeper, richer, more accurate learning. So just to give you a few examples, and I won't go through all the details of how to execute these, but really just to give you some ideas to kind of inspire you to think about things that you might be able to do in your own work. I'm going to go through a couple different examples. One, when you just have a lot to do, so that practical benefit of having more time. Another one is challenging times and locations and how this kind of approach can work with those. Also exploring a long process and exploring the evolution of an experience. So the first example is about mangoes and why Americans don't eat more mangoes. So this is an example of one where we just had a lot to do in a traditional 3-hour ethnography or 2-hour focus group. So the client wanted to explore what Americans' perceptions were of mangoes. They wanted them to go shopping for mangoes. They wanted them to actually prepare mangoes, and they wanted them to assess new mango creative, all in one study, all with the same participants. So the solution in this case was to do a 3-day online discussion board with a mobile component. So, not extending it weeks and weeks. We didn't need that much time, but even 3 days, going a little bit longer than a traditional study, gave us the time we needed to get through all that. And, there were some other benefits. We could do 20 participants in 3 days, as opposed to if we'd wanted to get across the country and visit 20 people, it would have taken us, at least 10 days and cost a lot of money for travel and time. And the client really loved seeing all the store displays that they were able to get pictures of from across the country. They got a lot of ideas from that. And you could see firsthand the challenges that novices encountered preparing a mango, which was much more realistic and detailed than if we'd asked them to describe what they'd done, or even if we'd asked them to prepare it in front of us. We got to see what tools they picked and how they kind of approached it. So here are just a couple slides from that study. Okay, so another situation where going long helps is when you're talking about challenging times and locations. So in this study, we wanted to learn get ideas for how to improve in-car infotainment systems. So we wanted to be with people in their car to see how they used their current systems and what was lacking or what challenges they faced. But of course, being with somebody in their car all the time they drive is kind of a big challenge. So we came up with this idea of instead of doing like a 2-hour focus group, we did a combination of things. So we did this 5-day digital auto journal, and we did that over a weekend and weekdays to try to cover the widest variety of driving situations. And then in this case, we followed up with in-person interviews. So the result of being with the participants longer than just the in-person interviews was that we got a much deeper understanding of their relationships with their car, their driving practices, what issues they run into, and it was all from a natural environment. They were actually doing their driving, commuting or carpooling or going away for the weekend on longer trips and things like that. All before we got to learn all that before we even met them in person. And here's just some examples of what these driving journals looked like ultimately. And then another example would be when you're studying a more involved process. So in this case, we wanted to explore how consumers decide what they're going to purchase over the winter holiday shopping period. So the challenge was, how do you learn about a process that takes place over 2 months to complete? So, a 2-hour focus group in January, trying to remember back to what they did in November. So in this case, we decided a more insightful approach would be to do a 10-week digital qualitative study. So we recruited them to start in early November, and we went all the way through mid-January. And participants had, some of it was kind of a journaling approach, more free form, and we had some specific questions and specific activities that we wanted them to do at various points during the study. So benefits in this case, we could be with them virtually at least, every step of the way with their researching, planning, shopping, purchasing, wrapping, giving, and returning, both online, in-store, and at home. So we were able to learn a lot more about that process than if we'd tried to use a shorter approach. And we also got a lot of images and videos which help bring the whole process to life for the client. So the last one would be an example of an evolution of an experience. There are lots of examples, but in this case, I'll just use the example of women using a new acne treatment. So, women, they might not get pimples every single day, at least they hope they don't. So we decided that the goal was to understand the emotional and the behavioral impact of a new acne treatment. And the challenge is, how do you observe usage and how that evolves over time? So maybe they use it one way when they're starting off, but what happens to compliance and how do they adjust their usage over when they become more familiar with it? So in this case, we did a 2-month digital qualitative study. It had both an ongoing journaling and also monthly in-depth questioning. And we certainly could have added like phone interviews or other aspects to this as well. And the benefits, again, would be able to learn both initial and long-term reactions. You could see them. They showed us videos of how they applied, talked about what they liked and disliked, all on their real-world usage. To wrap up, just to give you a few more ideas of ways that you might want to consider using longitudinal qualitative research would be if you're trying to study a process, so wedding planning, buying a car, picking a college, an evolution of something that you expect to change over time, so how you train your dog, usage of a new product, interest in a music service, or challenging timing and location. So you're trying to study a sporadic medical condition, or I just completed a study on what people lose. It's hard to know exactly when someone's going to lose something. So we did a longitudinal study on that, or snacking, lots of different situations where that might be relevant. So I hope that gives you some ideas and inspires you to think about making some longer longitudinal qualitative studies.